Good morning, everyone. This is Bobby from Healthy Aging by United Way. We're just going to take just a couple of seconds here to allow people into the Zoom room, and then we're going to get started. All right, good morning, everyone. Again, this is Bobby Sines with Healthy Aging by United Way. Welcome to today's webinar on motivational interviewing. Just a few housekeeping tips before we get started. Everyone is and will remain muted, cameras off, as we have over 100 people attending today's webinar. As you have questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A feature that you'll see located along the bottom of your screen. If you have any technical questions, please use the chat feature, and we'll keep those, get those sorted out for you as soon as possible. Also, this webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording along with additional resources will be shared with all of you following the webinar. I would now like to introduce you to today's speaker, Philipp Santiago. Philipp is the clinical lead for the Fraser Health Occupational Therapy, Mental Health and Substance Use, Rehabilitation and Recovery Services. Philipp was described to me as a very skilled and compassionate educator and practitioner who has an abundance of knowledge and expertise in motivational interviewing and goal setting. And we are thrilled to have Philipp here with us today. Over to you, Philipp.
Bobby, for that intro. In the interest of time, I'll just jump right into the presentation. As we start, I am so grateful to engage in my daily pursuits on the occupied traditional homelands of the Coast Salish and Laka'muk nations. As only a guest, I pledge to be mindful of my carbon footprint here and how I can reduce its impacts on this beautiful land. So that's my personal acknowledgement. And to acknowledge also your skill levels. So if you think of it, you might already know some of these skills regardless of how they're labeled. So I do want to acknowledge that some of these skills may not be new to you. If they're not, it is a chance to validate and practice the skills you do use and even be on the same page with your team. And before we get started, you'll see with our intentions that these are just the basics. We do have, I'd say, 45 minutes to skim through some content, but I'm confident that at least you'll be able to go away with some things you could practice with your team. There definitely is a lot of room for more training, so let's just keep that in mind. So the first intention is to just understand the basics of MI. So we'll define it, we'll talk about the spirit, so what does that encompass? We'll then get into some of the more concrete skills, so you'll get used to hearing what ORs are, and then even a strategy, a skill set that's called ask, tell, ask when giving information or advice. And then in terms of strategies, trying to apply that with trying to recognize how that you would use them when you are seeing or when you're hearing change talk and sustain talk, how to first just recognize that and then how to respond. And then trying to apply this to your work directly, to think of, well, to first reflect on what most clinicians come across in terms of practice concerns. And then we'll look at even the United Way intake process and see where we could infuse some of these things directly. And then finally, just making time as a team to see how we could collaborate together to continue on from this training. How can you all be on the same page and promote use of some of these skills? Okay, so just briefly about me in terms of my experience with MI. So through the Center for Collaboration, Motivation, and Innovation, CCMI, I completed their Train the Trainer program, and it happened over 7 months, ending in 2019. So I do have, I'd say, some exposure, but definitely not an expert. And on a personal note, I do love ice cream sandwiches. Okay, so I want you to imagine when working with a client who has ambivalence about something that has potential for positive change in their lives. You yourself having, one, a sense of confidence in supporting them move toward this positive change, and then based on a set of skills that are evidence-informed, client-centered, and trauma-informed. And then also having your team on the same page, using the same skills and language in support of each other with learning and implementing these skills with the clients you serve and support. So this is all possible through motivational interviewing. And you see here in brackets, I put in evocation, which is one of the elements of the spirit of MI. And you can see how, even how I worded this is trying to hit at the core values of everyone on the call today. Okay, so in terms of a quick definition, it is a collaborative conversation style to strengthen a person's own motivation and commitment to change. So pretty basic, but looking at it in collaborative and really targeting motivation and commitment, which then with MI is trying to get at those core values that the client has and connecting that to what you're also trying to do with them and see and show them the link. So which takes time. And just to reiterate that in terms of communication style, MI is a form of guiding. So taking bits and pieces from both extremes of being more directive and allowing the client to lead, right? We do want to be client-centered, but we do want to maximize our time with the client and use our skills to guide them to the result that we're both aiming for. And then directing, we want to avoid that too much. Again, it takes away from the power that the clients have themselves. So again, looking at guiding, being able to draw out the skills they have inside them, and really tap into that intrinsic motivation again. So in terms of skills now, well, I guess just in background for now, but getting more a sense of the spirit of MI. So we have an acronym here called CAPE. So C is for compassion, A is for acceptance, P for partnership, and E for evocation, which I kind of hinted on earlier. And the thing to keep in mind with these, again, I wouldn't say that this is all new information to you, but you can really, once we get into more of the concrete skills, you'll see how these really apply in your judgment in how to tailor the use of those skills to you and your client in the moment, right? So just kind of as I'd say as a prompt and a reminder to kind of see how your words that you're choosing are compassionate and are reserving judgment around what they're ambivalent about. How are your words being respectful of their autonomy, right? And looking at it as more of working with them and avoiding fixing, which is challenging to do in healthcare or in our roles, right? And then also, again, as a prompt to kind of remind ourselves, how can we use our words to have a lot of impact in trying to stir those connections to their values. And with the evocation here at the end, you see to try as much as possible to avoid fact-finding. I mean, we to a degree always have to do this in our work, but to kind of do that in a way that that doesn't make them feel just like everyone else, right? So that they're just someone that you're serving without any appreciation of their circumstances. So we'll get to that in talking about application for sure. So get a good sense of CAPE and how they all combine to support the more concrete MI skills. So this now is the first set of skills, and as I mentioned earlier, they're the ORs. So O standing for open-ended questions, but also closed-ended questions that are evocative. A for affirmations, R for reflections, and with reflections, there is a lot to pay attention to. There are two main types, starting with simple and complex, and then there are three types of complex reflections that are outlined, and then summaries. So we'll get into these individually now. Okay, so starting with O, so with open-ended questions, naturally these are questions that you cannot answer by yes or no, or by one word. And in our interactions with clients, this is important because we want them to be talking to us so we can get more information and support them, right? It's hard to do, especially if you don't have that rapport, to have questions that naturally don't allow discussion, right? So kind of thinking of how we can reword our questions so that it increases the chances of there being a conversation versus just a one-word response. So for example, this question here, what brings you here today? You know, that is not a yes or no question, right? And what more can you tell me about X? Having open-ended questions all the time can be tricky. So leaving room for closed-ended questions. Again, these are questions that you can reply to with a yes or no, but they're worded in a way where they are evocative enough that you can expect the person to not respond with only one word. So we're not going to get into brief action planning today, which gets into once a client is past ambivalence, when they're ready to start with a plan, that this is a statement taken directly from there, or a question. So is there anything you'd like to do for your health in the next week or two? They might say yes or no, but naturally you would anticipate there'd be more to that. And if not, you can again use your spirit of the mind to try and evoke more response. So that's your first, or your O, and open-ended questions or closed-ended questions that are evocative. With the second component or skill in ORs, we have affirmations. So I would expect this is something that naturally comes up in your work, where you are acknowledging a strength or value of a client that they haven't mentioned explicitly, or they're not really appreciating in the dilemma they're presenting. Naturally, this can help build rapport because the client gets a sense of you really understanding where they're at. And then naturally, this can increase their confidence for change because they are more aware of, again, of the strengths and values that maybe they were kind of aware of that they possess, but they're not making the connection in the moment to their dilemma. So an easy example of an affirmation is to say, you value X, right? So what from your interactions and your conversation can you pick? Can you draw a personal value of theirs and show that would be valuable for them in the situation? So for example, you could say that they value connection, right? So that could be a simple enough statement that they kind of turns on a switch inside them and say, yeah, I actually do. And that's probably why I should really try to, for instance, participate in this program. So again, the key thing with affirmations is that these are around skills that they aren't really cognizant of, and they haven't mentioned directly in their words with you. So the R in ORs stands for reflections. And again, I would say that these are the set of skills that you would see, or you're probably more familiar with. Looking at some of the documents that Bobby shared with me, looking at the program coordinator interview guide, the reflections are part of that naturally in how they discuss elements of active listening and summarizing client statements back to them. So that's exactly what this is. So reflecting what you're hearing. And it's in its most simplest form, As a simple reflection, it is just really repeating back what they say. And we'll get into the other types shortly. But really, this is highlighted in my training as being a critical skill with clients. So just to kind of reiterate with simple, these are reflections that stay true to the client's own words. It can involve rephrasing for sure, or even using their exact words. Again, here we have a statement saying that you should use these less often than complex reflections. But in your learning, you might just rely on these a bit more and start to, again, reflect after your sessions and see how maybe that more complex reflection could have been used. And the other point here is to make sure there isn't a rise in your voice pitch when you're stating a reflection, so it doesn't come across as a question, so it won't have the same impact. So for instance, if a client is saying, I'm really stressed about this, a simple reflection back will be, you're really stressed about this. But if you had that intonation change at the end and you said, you're really stressed about this, they might think it's a question. And again, it might take you on a different path and away from them really reflecting on what you're saying. We're trying to answer a question instead of reflecting on that statement. Okay, getting into complex reflections. Here as a learner, I acknowledge that this confused me a little bit, but without getting too concerned at this point, just to really look at complex reflections that, as reflections that try and guess at the deeper meaning of what's being communicated, or isn't as superficial, right? So this is where in your use of these MI skills, you're trying to get a better sense of their internal motivation and values and their story, right? So that involves a degree of guessing. So for instance, and again, naturally, because these statements allow us to learn more about the client, they keep the conversation moving forward, right? So if you could imagine having a conversation that was mainly reflecting back superficially on a simple level what you heard, you wouldn't be moving anywhere. You wouldn't be addressing the meat of the conversation as to what in the past had worked in terms of trying things, what didn't work, and where their motivation changed, right? So an example here is, again, if the client is saying, I'm really stressed about this, the guide can say, as a complex reflection, you have so much on your mind that the stress is building up and you're feeling super anxious. So again, there's a degree of interpretation there. And again, using the spirit of MI, hopefully the client feels comfortable enough to respond and even correct you, and to do so in a way where they feel they can give you that feedback. Okay, so here are the 3 different types of complex reflections. I'll mention them here just so that you have them. Again, I would definitely recommend more time to get into these in more detail. So the first type of complex reflection, again, is guessing about a feeling or the meaning of their statement. The second type of complex reflection is presenting both sides of the dilemma. This one is a bit easier for me, and we'll get to that in a bit. And the third one is paraphrasing and guessing the next part of the story. So you can kind of see how 1 and 3 are kind of similar, but one being more in the moment and focusing on that one statement and maybe a feeling, and 3 is looking at the bigger picture. That's how I make sense of those.
Philip, can I just pause there for a minute? Can you just maybe adjust your microphone just because your audio is going in and out a little bit?
Oh, okay. Maybe I'll come closer.
That's perfect. Thanks, Philip.
My head might get cut off, but that's okay. Okay. I do have a soft voice naturally, so I'll try and project a bit more too. Okay, so with with reflections, we're getting into complex and just getting into the 3 different types in a bit more detail. So the first one I mentioned was just guessing the emotion or the meaning. So in terms of if a client were to say, I wish I were more active, if you were trying to guess the meaning of that, you could probably think of things like them not being happy with their body, them being afraid of not being able to move more and more, them wondering or thinking to themselves, I should take better care of myself so I can take care for my partner. I know what I should do, but I don't know how, right? So this really gets at really personalizing the conversation. It could also be wondering how, or reflecting on how they used to be really active and it made them feel really good, but they just don't know how or why they stopped, right? So these are the nuggets that become really helpful to bring up. Again, it's all very individual. So this is where you, as the clinician, is a detective to try and make sense of this using these types of statements. So that's the first type of complex reflection. The second type of complex reflection is a bit easier because you can just think of these double-sided reflections as being 2 sides of the same coin, as is how they word it. So here we introduce some key terms with sustained talk and change talk. So sustained talk can being what are they saying directly to you that speaks to them not feeling they can change or don't want to at this moment. And then change talk naturally is what you're hearing them directly say that even speaks to glimpses of them being open to the change. So if I give you an example of, let's see here. Okay, if you heard a client say, I found out that I'm at risk of becoming diabetic a week ago and I want to do the right thing for my health and even lose some weight. But my partner loves junk food and I just can't keep myself from eating junk food. So if you were to pick out the sustained talk and the change talk from what you heard the client say, here we have, again, the sustained talk being it's hard to say no to the junk food. And then the change talk being you want to do the right thing for your health. And then in presenting this back to the client, there is a trick where you want to always make sure that you are presenting the sustained talk first, and then following that with the change talk. And this is so that naturally the change talk is what's fresh in their minds after the statement. If it were flipped, there's increased chances of them responding with a statement that is that would continue the narrative around the sustained talk, right? So just keep that in mind. And if you really want to get fancy, the authors, Miller and Rolnick, they encourage you to not use but. They find there's an element of judgment to that word. So in presenting both sides of the coin here, or presenting the sustained talk and the change talk, to connect them with an and instead of a but. So take something you can use to, but, and it's not like it's a bad thing to use, but if you did want to try and incorporate that is an option too. So that is a second type of complex reflection. And then finally, the last type of complex reflection, which looks at the bigger picture, I'd say, and how the story continues. So the formula here is looking at having a simple reflection. Again, either paraphrasing their statement or changing the words a little bit, and then adding on your guess about what the next part of the story might be. So if you want to compare this to the first type of complex reflection, instead of the story overall, they were even just speaking to that statement in that moment, and even or looking at a specific feeling that they might be experiencing. So if a client said, I don't know if this program is for me. You as the guide can say, and this is your complex reflection that is trying to paraphrase and continue the story. You feel that this program isn't for you right now. You feel that it is all too much too soon. And though you see the benefits, you don't see how this is something you can realistically do. So kind of taking it past into the future and beyond the present, and kind of trying to paint the picture of what the future could look like. Okay, so the last element of your ORs, the S, is summaries. So these are extended reflections, so another type of reflection that combine a chosen few statements combined together in a meaningful way. And then they end with an evocative question. And these show you're really thinking about the content of what they're saying. You're making connections and guesses. You're really trying to understand their dilemma. And it's fine to also include affirmations as part of that if that has that impact. So this is where you can have that flexibility with how you use the ORs. And again, naturally, with summaries can help move the conversation forward and maybe even closer to making some change or considering change. So as an example, with a client, you might say, you feel this program isn't for you at this time. You feel it's too much, too soon, and unrealistic. You feel you don't have much time left in your life to make a big change for yourself. And at the same time, you see the benefits. So you can see, I even threw in that complex reflection, the double-sided one, and even ending with the positive change talk. What would it take for you to feel you can move forward? So ending with an evocative question. So that's summaries. So that is a really quick introduction to the ORs. And again, these are the 4 of them. And what's recommended in terms of even your ratio of questions to reflections. Each of these skills have their benefit for sure, but in terms of how often you're using them, again, we mentioned that affirmations should be used sparingly for that impact and effect. Just imagine if you heard affirmations nonstop, you might start to question their authenticity, right? And then we heard the value of reflections and even the more complex ones. And again, the complex ones may be tricky to wrap your head around and get really comfortable using. But even if you started with simple ones for the beginning, and then also appreciating that it's best to make sure you're using more reflections than questions. Again, trying to avoid the client feeling that it is a pretty robotic interaction. And again, questions have their place, but again, if it can be more about reflections and moving the conversation forward to try and use more reflections. So I know that it's a lot to kind of digest real quick, but those are the ORs, and they're well, I would say they're the core set of skills in MI. Moving on to a second set is looking at the ask, tell, ask skill set. And this becomes more pertinent when giving information or advice, which naturally happens in your line of work. So what this involves is asking, telling, and then asking. Pretty simple, but there are a few options here to be aware of. So looking at, well, with the first ask, it can be either asking permission to give information or advice, which is a good habit to always do. You can also follow that up. You can ask permission, then also follow up with the next potential ask. is what they already know or want to know. This is a great way to really explicitly show that you are being client-centered in seeking out what they know before just telling them everything, right? To acknowledge that power and information they already have. And even see what they want to know, maybe on top of what you have to cover in your agenda in the session. What are they wanting to know? And there are ways that we'll get to where maybe there are things you have to get through, but to still include this in capturing their input, so that they're naturally is more they're more inclined to participate. And then telling is the middle part of this, and to tell it in a way that is clear, and to share this information in chunks. So even picking the top 3 pieces of information that you want to convey, and then ending with another ask, asking what they think of what you said, and or what they understood from you, from what you said. Especially in cases where you do want to make sure that they're clear of what you conveyed, you might ask them to repeat back what they said, not to make sure of course you want to make sure that they're clear with the information, but you want to phrase it in a way that it's about you making sure you did your job, and saying it in a way that they understood. So this really just goes through the same steps in more detail. It's just more fleshed out a bit more. And you have this in your handout, so I won't spend too much time on it. So even with this tell, all of these steps and tips are important, but I would even as a newbie focus on number 2 and 3, which I've bolded. So giving the information in a neutral way. Again, paying attention to where the information sharing might be interpreted as you trying to persuade, right? You might actually trying to do that to a degree, but really trying to, again, in keeping in mind the spirit of MI to try and stay neutral. And here with number 3, you're seeing that there is instruction to follow or focus on maybe 1 or 2 key messages, maybe 3, just to make sure the information is taken and stored properly. I really like this strategy because I have the tendency, maybe with the doctor, to kind of agree to what they're saying, and that makes sense in the moment, but then it's lost or whatnot. So this is a nice way to just chunk it, really do some learning in the moment to reinforce that learning, and leave room for questions if things aren't clear. So again, this is in your handout, so I won't spend too much time here, but again, just a different sampling of ways to phrase things with your asks. But maybe to highlight here, with the second ask is a teach back method. So here, again, wanting to make sure that there's understanding. And you could say something like, I want to make sure I did a good job explaining. Could you say it back to me so I know I was clear? You can anticipate how if this isn't worded sensitively, that clients could be offended, might think that you think that that they need that extra help, right? Another option here is to say, if someone asks you what we talked about today, what would you tell them? And especially when it comes to equipment or forms, to then have them demonstrate their understanding of how to use that. Okay, so again, with ask, tell, ask, just to pay attention to some special cases. So there must be some instances in your work where there are things you just have to discuss, whether they be things like rules or your professional duties, or considering their safety. So it's about setting those boundaries and expectations in a very client-centered way. So here, as an example, pulling directly from the intake process, asking what they already know about for instance, the participant responsibilities of the program. They might say, I have no idea, or I know this and this, and you can say, yeah, like those are elements of it. Just to be clear, I'll tell you the first three, or I'll review with you the first three. And here they are. And so you might then at the end ask to, again, using the teach back method, to have them repeat that back to you. And depending on your client, you can get a sense quickly of how much they're appreciating you being client-centered, asking for permission, and so on. And maybe then you might want to speed it up. Maybe maybe you feel you can chunk a few more pieces of information together, right? So there's a room for tailoring it to your client interaction that way as well. So in terms of another special case, so we just went through where there's something you have to discuss, but maybe it's an instance where they're asking you for advice and for them to tell you what to do. So again, in the spirit of MI, you want to highlight choice and their partnership and how you as a guide are providing information and they're in charge. So you're in charge, but I can share my experience of what others have done in a similar situation with you. Or not to get too technical and to confuse you, this kind of threw me off as a learner, but offering a menu of options, which is a special type of Vastel lessons called the behavioral menu. So asking permission here, may I share some ideas that may work for you? Then you can try X, X, or X. So maybe again 2 to 3 things to not present too much information. And then also leaving room there for if asking if they've there in the moment come up with their own ideas. So being very client-centered that way. And then ending with another ask, would any of these ideas work? So again, it's open-ended and it's phrased in a way that will move the conversation forward. Okay, so those were the 2 big skills or skill sets I wanted you to walk away from today's talk with getting a good introduction on. So in terms of more applications, so getting a sense of how you're going to have your radar on for what we define as change talk and sustained talk already. So I went through this earlier, but just maybe to highlight in this example, I would really like to get out in the community, but it's very hard to do with my low mood and joint pain. So if you were to, again, use your double-sided complex reflection in reflecting this back, you would again start with what and end with what. Right, so you're going to start with the sustained talk. So that would be, it'd be very hard to get out into the community with your low mood and joint pain. And you would really like to get out in the community. So you can see how that opens up them in responding to talk about their excitement about getting out in the community. So just starting to have those filters on for change talk and sustained talk in your interactions. So this is just a nice way to, as a prompt again, when you are with your clients, to kind of try and code their talking into being change talk, sustained talk, or maybe in the middle where they're on that fine line of ambivalence and not really moving forward or back. In terms of now responding to change talk and sustained talk, once you hear them, it's just a few tips. So sustained talk isn't bad. There's a lot of useful information you can gather from that, and it's definitely useful to validate in terms of their personal experience, but you don't want to overemphasize it. It might be natural to really spend a lot of time to process it, but and that's fair, but just make sure you're not spending too much time on it to the point where you find that if you're trying to transition to talking about change, that they feel stuck, right? So I would say this is again where a lot of it will come to your personal style and where you feel you are with the client, but to make sure you have a way out of those conversations, invalidating the sustained talk, and then jump into the change talk skillfully, of course. And then naturally, when you are noticing these in your conversations, you're starting to code them to think of ways to move the conversation forward, right? It's as a learner, you can get into this good routine of using the ors, but maybe not seeing where you have, based on something they said, you could move forward and closer to the change they're considering. So that's where this type of setup in your head can kind of think, yeah, I'm using my ors in this conversation, but where am I in terms of their dilemma, their ambivalence, and the potential change for better with our program. So this kind of really addresses what I really spoke to just now, but maybe looking at, well, first, I'm just even looking at these two bolded headings. So again, thinking now that you have a good handle of what ors are, how you can use them to evoke change talk, right? So again, thinking of that element of the spirit of MI and evoking, trying to tap into things that they will tell you that will speak to their values, their challenges of trying to change things in the past, and where there are skills you can highlight to make them feel that they can at least try for change. So you're going to use your ors for that. And then in terms of deepening the change talk, here are some suggestions. Again, this is where more of your in-depth training will come, but exploring reasons, affirming strengths and values, which we've talked about. When change talk is strong, exploring a plan to move forward, right? So this is where you can then get a sense of, again, on that spectrum, even are really close to change talk and their ambivalence is really, really low and you're ready to get into a plan. So getting into a plan moving forward. And really important is to really not rush to a plan and get a sense of when there is resistance, because it's natural to go back and forth between there being more change talk and then there being more sustained talk, and so going back and forth to process. So just quickly, a few minutes here. In terms of, again, practice, looking at mandatory assessments specifically, you could see that some of these points that were drawn on earlier, but what's recommended when you have something that you need to do is to present it in this way. So saying, and it's called an MI sandwich. So starting with an open-ended question. I have many questions I need to ask you today, but before that, what would you like us to review? So again, setting that boundary. These are things I have to do, but I want to know right away so I can make a note what else you would want us to, what's on your mind. And you'll see the question is also open-ended. And then transitioning to what you need to do. So let's get those questions I need to ask you out of the way. And then ending that section with an open-ended question. So thank you for your responses with these questions I need to ask you. What, if any, would you like to review specific to those questions? And then again, with the time you've allotted for responding to what else they've raised with you, if anything. So these next two slides, I'll let you look at these on your own, but these are really powerful statements and questions that really can support you in being evocative and moving conversations forward, especially when you are hearing a lot of sustained talk and quote unquote resistance. So just as an example, reasons for change, you might ask, what are the 3 best reasons for you to make a change, right? Trying to tap into that intrinsic motivation. And then even on the next slide, what can be really powerful are change rulers and numbers. So on a scale of 0 to 10, how important it is for you to make this change. Why is it a blank and not a zero? So validating that whatever they said is better than a zero, right? To draw on that as a positive. And then to ask, what would it take to increase it to a higher number? And then what do you think you might need to do to increase that importance for you? So really powerful questions that are very poignant and get to the point. Okay, so the next set of slides are really quick, and I just highlighted some things directly from the intake documents I looked at. So even considering part one of the intake. So again, this is a great time to use the MI sandwich. For example, the intake for programs is robust, and this is because blank. So you can kind of get into why. You can talk about some key points from the participation agreement. I have a series of intake questions that I need to ask you today. But before that, what would you like us to make sure we discuss before the end of our session? And again, maybe you don't have, in the end, you don't have time to address it in the moment, but at least you've captured it and you can follow up on it. And then naturally that transition, and then that open-ended question at the end. And then given the nature of the intake process, the content that's in there and the service you're providing, naturally you can see how it makes sense to try and use your ORs throughout that conversation and that meeting. And we touched on this earlier, again, with part one of your intake, being clear as to why the information is collected. For instance, you can emphasize how the health and safety considerations are important for their safety and staff safety. You can reiterate that clients can answer what they're comfortable with, based, again, citing the risks and discomfort statement from the participation agreement. So really highlighting their options and the power they have in that partnership, reflecting on the spirit of MI. And again, and maybe this is part of your practice already, but really paying attention to how, especially if there are several questions, to kind of really, again, speak to why it's being done and how it's not something that is meant to point them and single them out. It's just a part of a process that everyone who's being considered for the program is also doing. So trying to normalize that for them. And naturally to set the tone with them being able to take breaks and even it might be helpful to share the typical length of time taken to review or go through a session. So looking at the second part of your process for intake, again, naturally the MI sandwich seems good to pull. Using ORs again, especially since things that come up in the conversation and in that form include discussion about ER visits, right, and hours spent actively caregiving. So it can get really emotionally charged, and you can see how there may be a good opportunity to use some affirmations and naturally reflections, right? So again, rating your during part two, asking the caregiver to rate their overall health, feelings of sadness, depression, hopelessness, anger, or guilt, right? So yes, ask those questions, but again, appreciating the time you have. Maybe there's time for a quick use of your ORs, right? And again, you can start to get a good sense of what you're hearing in terms of change talk and sustain talk. And again, try and use your ORs to support moving forward with the positive change. Part three, so again, the MI sandwich I think would be really helpful. And then given that part three is done at intake 6 months and 12 months, there's a lot of room and a lot of content you can draw on to validate and fan the change talk and appreciate the sustain talk that you're hearing from their participation in the program so far. You can see if the ambivalence can be addressed in a supportive way without being too pushy, right? You don't want to rush them to to a plan that can definitely backfire. And then let's see here, naturally using your oars again, and then based on your timing, leaving room for deeper conversation after you've gone through all your questions. Well, the point I was getting at here is that you might, depending on the client, you might want to address something that's on their mind in the moment and while you're going through the questions you need to get through. But if you're confident that you have time after, you can reserve that for later. If you feel also that maybe there's time later, but for more impact, it makes sense to address in the moment to feel that you can do that. So have that degree of flexibility with how you use these skills. Okay, so that really is all of the content for today. This last section really is trying to look at what are some key resources and suggestions for you to carry on with this session. Again, exploring as a team room for more training. So even considering the organization I got my training through, CCMI, the Center for Collaboration, Motivation, and Innovation. But I also know that Change Talk Associates in the Lower Mainland also offers some courses, and I'm sure there are other online opportunities with different organizations as well. I've referenced the authors in their book that came out in 2012 here, and then even considering with your colleagues and your teams, informal or formal, how you can get into a habit of practice and feedback. So maybe we don't spend too much time here, but maybe if it's just a point of reflection. So what team processes are in place that currently, what processes are in place currently that would support MI adoption and continued use? And where is there potential for more support with MI adoption and use among the team? So I'll leave it at that. If there are some questions or comments, we can review them now, but I hope that was a good introduction to some of these core concepts in motivational interviewing. Again, if it was something that wasn't new to you, again, a point of reflection and to be on the same page with your team.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Philip. That was great. We do have a few minutes for some Q&A, so please feel free to go to the Q&A tab along the bottom of your screen and type in your questions, and we will read those out for Philip. And as those start to come in, I just want to remind everybody that we will be posting the recording of today's webinar along with the slides, the handouts that Philip referred to, as well as some additional links for you to take a look at your own time post event, and those will all be posted to CORE. So you'll see those very shortly. Thank you again, Philip. I in particular love the MI sandwich. I thought that was a great tool that everybody could put in their back pocket, and really appreciated you spending some time looking at the intake process that we have and providing some suggestions to what that looked like. So we do have our first question from Andrea. And she says, if a client is ambivalent during the first session where MI is executed and then comes back for their second session with choices that may be harmful to themselves or others, what techniques do you use to guide them to positive affirmations?
Okay, so definitely appreciating the complexity of that situation. So if they were to come back, and sorry, there were some questions around safety? Or?
Sure, I'll read the question again. There was a second part to it as well. So if a client is ambivalent during their first session where MI is executed and then comes back for their second session with choices that may be harmful to themselves or others, what techniques do you use to guide them to positive affirmations? Then she goes on to say, or do you support their dignity of risk? Example, continuing to smoke cigarettes despite having lung cancer.
Okay. So And just to pre-plan, I would, and kind of appreciate how this can come up with the population you serve, to really maybe set that tone in the first session, where you are really clear of how in the end you are responsible for you have some professional duties in making sure the service is safe and so on. So maybe that means again, if on the extreme of harm, to kind of say, in these extreme cases, I would need to seek additional help if needed, right? To kind of make that clear during the first session, so it's easier to navigate later, and even if it weren't as extreme. So with the example of maybe harmful choices around smoking and affirmation. So this is where it's going to be a combination of things. So based on what they've said, can you draw on some positives that maybe they don't see as a positive? So they can say, they might feel really lost with, I really want to participate in this program, but I feel I just can't quit smoking. And so a nice affirmation is that, or a simple affirmation could be, you feel empowered enough to still participate in the program. You came here today, right? So something that, and that can give a glimmer of hope where they feel powerless, but the first step is coming and seeking help, right? So you can say you value the support that's out there, right? And you're not giving up, right? So there are ways to address it that way. And again, it gets tricky because you can really adapt it to the individual situation, but there definitely are ways to do that. And then the second part of the question?
It was just, do you support their dignity of risk? Example, continuing to smoke cigarettes despite having lung cancer.
Right. So with the idea of partnership, definitely staying on the fence, but again, being neutral, but speaking to their choice being informed. So you, in your role, making sure that they're clear of the risks and so on, and leaving it at that, right? But this is where the fine line is. If there's something in the moment that's acutely affecting their safety, then again, it might be a matter of relying on that earlier conversation that was had, hopefully that spoke to the need to seek help if needed.
Great, thanks, Phil. And if I could you just go to back a slide. There was somebody here that was asking about the Center for Innovation, Collaboration, and
right, CCMI.
So yeah, CCMI. So there you go, Lori. And another question, any tips on how to progress a situation where client seems unwilling to do the work for change, where they want the program or the coordinators to fix the problem?
Right, so definitely complex and a lot of things to consider. Again, one thing in terms of thinking ahead and how this could be a pattern with the clients you serve is to really stress maybe it is a time limited program, right? And to kind of say it is natural for clients to feel they want to be in this program, but then maybe they change their mind. And so kind of have maybe these quarterly reviews or whatnot, where you hold them accountable. You kind of say, this is something you signed up on, you felt compelled to engage in. We have X amount of time left. If you're really hoping to make some progress with this change, this is the time we have left. We need to optimize it, right? So to kind of think of avoiding around that, but that type of strategy of really, again, revisiting the program and the spark that was lit when they kind of signed on, right? So that's one thing you can do, and then again, it all depends on the client, but you would hope that in trying to just understand the client and where they're at, to again, hold back that judgment, maybe reserve some of those harsh words that you might have, and kind of just trying to hear them out where they're at. And hopefully from those conversations, again, you can make linkages to again, where they feel that why, again, did they initially sign on to this. And this is where those last couple of slides were really helpful with being really evocative, right? So let's see if there's one that we can pull on. And so let's see. So maybe quick extremes. So suppose you decide not to change, what's the worst thing that could happen, right? And what's the best thing that could happen? So I could imagine if they're not putting in the work, or maybe, and this is something that you can kind of slide in and say, you know, I appreciate that you feel that the program isn't working for you, or you feel you can't commit to the things that we think that will support you with this change. I want you to think, worst case scenario, you know, what would that look like if you left this program and nothing changed, right? So try and stir some of that inner emotion, and then reflect with the opposite. What's the best thing that could happen? So that's just one example, again, of the beauty of MIs that could kind of unfold in all these different ways once you are super comfortable with all the different ways that the skills can be used, but that's just one example.
Fantastic, Philip, thank you. Well, we are at time, so I want to thank all the participants for joining us today. Thank Philip for leading us through the motivational interviewing and giving us some good guidance and tips on how we can implement that in our regular day-to-day programming. So much appreciated, everybody being here today. And as I said before, we'll share all of these amongst other resources later on today for your review. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Thanks all for the opportunity. And just to quickly mention, the handouts that I did send in that were attached are part of the resources that are open, well, public access on the CCMI website. So you can kind of see, if you were to go Google CCMI motivational interviewing, those same documents will come up, and there'll be more information about any training they offer. So that's where those came from.
Fabulous. Thanks, Philip. Bye, everyone.
Thanks,
Enjoy
everyone.
your day.